Harvard University is being targeted right now. Not only when it comes to federal funding, as Harvard is trying to scrape away whatever it can from federal funding, and the lack of federal funds is going to be undercutting a lot of research programs, which people have already been discussing on how that's going to undermine and undercut American science, R&D, and development. But now we're seeing the government go further in punishing Harvard for it not participating with its crackdown on what they thought was, quote unquote, we're going to read, but pro-terrorist conduct. A lot of it basically means demonstrations on Harvard campuses that are pro-Palestine, or in some instances, when you talk about individual members, might even be pro-Hamas, but largely speaking, pro-Palestine. Sliced Brownies, thank you so much for the 5. Did you cover the Super Alpha Andrew Wilson complete failure on whatever? No, I saw a clip of him failing to open a olive jar, and I said, wow, what intellectual rigor, and then I kept scrolling. Very sorry. Anyway, so Harvard is now being punished in a little bit more aggressive manner than just cutting off or trying to strangle federal funds. And let me just say, that's already bad enough. And I thought it was disgusting when the federal government cut off the funds for the Harvard research project that was helping to collect information on the kidnapped and trafficked Ukrainian children after the Russians illegally invaded Ukraine. And when they cut it off so abruptly that they even lost access to the information temporarily, thought that was disgusting. I thought the cutoff in research was just shooting us in the foot scientifically. But this right here is self-imposed brain drain. This right here is self-imposed brain drain for ideological control that's not necessary if you knew anything about the history of what campuses were like in the United States, unless you wanted the type of control that is not something like we've seen in the United States before. Let me explain. Let me read this message to you from Homeland Security, DHS, an official government social media account. Harvard is being held accountable for collaboration with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. For anybody who might think, is that some sort of education department? No, it is what you think. The Chinese Communist Party. Fostering violence, anti-Semitism, and pro-terrorist conduct from students on its campus. Collaboration with the Chinese Communist Party and violence, anti-Semitism, pro-terrorist conduct from students on its campus. Let me read you the message they posted with this. This administration is holding Harvard accountable for fostering violence, anti-Semitism, and coordinating with the Chinese Communist Party on its campus. It is a privilege, not a right, for universities to enroll foreign students and benefit from their higher tuition payments to help pad their multi-billion-dollar endowments. Harvard had plenty of opportunity to do the right thing. It refused. They have lost their student and exchange visitor program certificate as a result of their failure to adhere to the law. Let this serve as a warning to all universities and academic institutions across the country. Secretary Kristi Noem. Let this serve as a warning to all universities and academic institutions across the country. This is an intimidation tactic. See, it's a 1-2 punch. You target their federal funds that help the research projects that bring a lot of people to Harvard to be at the cutting edge. The reason why Harvard is a well-known name is because they're at the cutting edge. They're at the cutting edge of research. They're at the cutting edge of socio-political research. They're at the cutting edge. And so when you don't have the funds in order to be at the cutting edge, Well, then maybe these people will go to schools somewhere else. Maybe they'll go to schools in Europe. Maybe they'll go to schools in Asia. Maybe they'll go to schools somewhere much cheaper. I mean, it's one thing to have to pay high tuition from Harvard, but be able to get into all these great programs. It's another thing to pay high tuition and, not be able to get into the same high programs when you could pay a lot less to maybe not to get the same services, but a lot of the same education benefit, maybe some connection. Point is, you're undercutting the school. And then with this cut of their inflow of foreign students, period, you're not just making it so it's not an attractive location due to the undercut of research funding for anyone, but you're also making it that for those who are able to get around that, for Harvard, if it's still able to keep some of these research projects alive through getting alternative funding or through doing XYZ, well, too bad if you're a foreign student. We can't legally ban students from inside America from going there, but we can stop the foreign ones. Mind you, they say it's a privilege, not a right, for universities to enroll foreign students. Why?
Trump attacked the judiciary, the scientists, and now is going after the universities. How to start a dictatorship 101.
We're going to talk about that in a moment, Seaver. Thank you so much for the €6. When they say it's a privilege, not a right. If you are making the argument that, hey, I don't believe Harvard should get our money because it is allowing conduct that we don't like on its campuses. Someone might make an argument of, hey, this is the United States, freedom of expression, I think it's a core principle. If we introduce foreigners to the United States through, you must speak this way while in our country, you cannot critique. If you see anybody participating in un-American protests, please report. If that's their first interaction with us, they're not going to really believe we're the, land of the free, home of the brave. They're going to believe, oh, okay, well, I know this political culture. I've existed around this political culture before. Okay, well, I think all what I've heard about America's education system, what I've heard about America's freedoms, maybe it's not all what it's cracked up to be. And so I think that Harvard has a purpose, has a reason to say, look, if students on this campus want to protest and be pro-Palestine, if people on their campus want to protest and even be associating with groups that it could have pro-terrorist sentiment, as long as they're not expressing open support for violence, and as long as they're not openly supporting terror attacks, and they are just supporting the movement, then what do you want? And look, I'm not going to point to one or two instances of, hey, there's this one individual saying something that's really edgy or making a Hamas chant and say, okay, no more free speech in Harvard. That's ridiculous. If you're going to have a campus protest, there's going to be a little bit of extremism. There's going to be a little bit of radicalism. That's not to justify it. That's to say that college campuses have always been where radical ideas are tried out, where young people try to find themselves out and they're trying to find the world out, and they're testing out anarchism. They're testing out, hardcore libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism or whatever silly, ridiculous ideology alongside whatever cause that inspires them. That might motivate them for the rest of their life or just for the rest of the semester. And so these have always been environments for a certain amount of radical thought. Hell, America as a continent has always been an area for some sort of radical thought. And so Harvard defending their right to engage in that type of radical thought on their campus, I think makes sense. I think it makes sense for its credibility as an institution more than the federal funding for the next 3 years from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security or its endorsement and such. But this cutoff of the foreign students, this could be devastating. This could be devastating. I mean, not only is it true what they said that the foreign students do pay a lot into the university, they say, oh, to help your multi-billion-dollar endowments and XYZ. To be clear, a lot of this is going to be borne out in the areas that they've already cut research projects, which is going to, again, hurt the United States. But a lot of this is also going to be borne out when it comes to just the quality of its educational programs. That it's not just going to all every time it's going to be, oh, they're cutting this sports program or that sports program or this frill or that frill. Some of that will happen, I'm sure, but that's not going to be the case in every instance. And it's not like that particularly bothered the Trump administration when they made those cuts that it hurt that program that was trying to get those Ukrainian kids home. And I want to bring up what C-Roy talked about earlier. Trump attacked the judiciary. For those of you who do not know, Donald Trump went to a lot of big law firms and basically intimidated them to give him over $1 billion in free legal services or face their legal wrath of the Trump administration. And the Trump administration has been going over the right of lawyers who participated in lawsuits against his administration to be lawyers, to participate in the legal process as an intimidation tactic to keep lawyers from acting against his administration while they're trying to push through a bunch of clearly illegal and in many instances unconstitutional actions. Like, for example, his unconstitutional gutting of the CFPB along with Doge without a vote from Congress, even though it was an institution created by Congress. And therefore, according to Article 1 of the Constitution, it is only Congress that can create or abolish said institution. And that's why the traditional tactic of somebody who didn't like an institution was appointing somebody to head it that you didn't like. So you would put somebody at the top of, say, the CFPB who didn't really want to regulate the business community too much. But Trump wanted to avoid that process altogether. Trump knew that he did not have a legislative majority. That meant he could just push this through. You know, he could just say, hey, Congress, we want to get rid of the CFPB. We have a 2/3 majority. Let's do it. So he instead tried to do it through executive action. He tried to do it by having Doge go in there without even the authority to do this in many instances and do it for them. And it got them where? It got them to a gutted CFPB that in 3 years might be restored, but it will be with a lot of brain drain, will be with a lot less effectiveness. This is a way to bleed out an organization instead of just making it not enthusiastic with its enforcement, as Republicans have traditionally done when it comes to appointing people to the CFPB or appointing people to the labor board or appointing people to wherever it may be. This is skipping out on the Constitution in order to shank, really legally, financially, and personnel-wise, shank these organizations while they're still technically legally on the books. So he, in my mind, is trying to get institutional capture and intimidation. He intimidated the law firms into giving him billions of dollars in free legal services while punishing those who dare challenge the most powerful man on the planet, who dare challenge the man who's backed by the richest man on the planet, those who dare challenge the richest man on the planet, backing the most powerful man on the planet, leading the most powerful country on the planet. Can't sue him. Can't sue him, can't hold him accountable. Most transparent presidency ever. Okay, most transparent presidency ever. So transparent, so willing to be put under scrutiny. So willing. So this is bad for freedom of expression. This is bad for the culture of the country. This is bad for the presidency intimidating those into cultural submission to him. But this is also very bad for the long-term research health of the country, to keep us on the cutting edge instead of allowing many other countries to overtake us, whether it be China, whether it be the European continent, who is trying to suck up the brain drain from us. Europe is trying to benefit from us cutting all these research projects by gobbling up the researchers, trying to bring them over to Europe. China's going to be doing the same thing. Every time you see us damaging ourselves like this, we're not in a situation where we can just, like, there's no competition in town. There is competition in town. There is competition in town. They can go somewhere else. And I don't know if this is some amount of belief that America is so exceptional, so amazing, so over the top that nobody could ever leave. and therefore, these people have no choice but to have to find some way to come back. But in many instances, you're not giving them ways to come back. Or if this is just a complete lack of care, about whether or not you want these research programs to keep going, a complete lack of care whether we have long-term research, health, or strength for this country. And what's more important, and what's the more immediate priority, is loyalty of the legal system to you, loyalty of the educational system, the higher educational system to you. I mean, the public education system is still something they're trying to get a saddle on, still something they're trying to figure out. But don't worry, they're getting that too. Oklahoma education standards say students must identify 2020 election discrepancies. New academic standards in Oklahoma call for the teaching of discrepancies in the 2020 election results, continuing the spread of false narratives years after it was first pushed by President Trump and his allies. The standards were enacted last month after the Republican-controlled legislature declined to block them. And while the process to advance the standards has drawn ire from members of Oklahoma's majority party, the question of the standards' content has gotten little pushback. And to be clear, the way this works in Oklahoma is that the students have to be taught things like, oh, did you know in the middle of the night, just a bunch of ballots just kind of got tabulated and added? Isn't that crazy? Oh, did you know that there was above average mail-in voting this election? Which there's questions about the security of mail-in voting. That's crazy. And it's a bunch of like questions without answers to make you skeptical. It's nothing like, oh, we know that the election was fraudulent. It's an, here's the big evidence of all this election fraud that was claimed. No, it's just a bunch of questions without answers, even though in many instances you could answer it. Like, for example, the question of like, oh, why were these things tabulated in the middle of the night? Oh, well, a lot of times when at the start, you'll have a lot of the votes tabulated from, the mail-in votes. Or, oh, if somebody mails in a vote, it does an absentee ballot, it has to be tabulated at this certain time. Or, oh, that's when these votes are brought in, that's when those votes are brought in. You can go in and you can explain that. You can go in and you can explain that. And you could put that in the book and you can explain that to the kids. You could do discrepancy that people talked about, and then best explanation. Best explanation isn't necessary. An individual teacher in Oklahoma can decide in that instance that let's get into best explanations, but that teacher is not necessarily equipped to do that. And the teacher is not necessarily directed to do that. And so the way that the education material works is leaving students guessing.
Oklahoma really working hard to go from position 49 to position 50 in education ranking in the U.S.
By the way, this is the same state where they were considering, when we were talking about teaching the Bible in schools, and one of the leading contenders to be the Bible that was being taught in schools was and I shit you not, the Trump Bible. Because the way that they wrote the restrictions on what Bibles could be used in schools was suspiciously written to the exact restrictions that would allow the Trump Bible to be one of the few competitors because of its need to include things like the U.S. Constitution and other documents that the Trump Bible just so happened to include. Institutional capture. It's a slow process. There is resistance, but we can see where the end result may lie. This isn't just something that is taught as a discrepancy in Oklahoma public education. This logic is then extended to requirements to get into roles within the Trump administration, i.e., high-ranking U.S. intelligence or U.S. intelligence or law enforcement roles at the CIA, and roles at the FBI. Let me just read the byline of this. You guys can go read this Washington Post article if you're not subscribed to the Washington Post. You can read other reports about this, but candidates for top intelligence and law enforcement jobs were asked to give yes or no responses to questions such as, was January 6th an inside job? Why would this matter for a job at the CIA? Why would this matter for a job at the FBI? Donald Trump is a man who requires loyalty above all else. He wants it of the legal system. He wants it of the education system. And he wants it of the U.S. intelligence and law enforcement system. And it's not just loyalty to the office of the presidency, it's loyal to him. January 6th was to empower him, and it undermined the office of the presidency in the process of transfer. Loyalty above efficiency. That's how we have Tulsi and RFK. We got loyalty picks over people doing the job right. And this is what the end result's going to be. Institutional capture over efficiency of government. And I mean, it'll probably be borne out with countries dealing with our country dealing with natural disasters less effectively, or us dealing with disease response less effectively, law enforcement less effectively, and sadly, I mean, even terror response less effectively. If you're choosing loyalty over the effectiveness of actually doing the job, this is how you get corruption that decays the state.